Cool. So today, for the way that I take, we're taking some time to kind of break down the budget, which is something that you tend to do fairly early on in the process, especially if you're thinking of ultimately where are we going to shoot this? What kind of actors are we going to have? What kind of costumes are we going to have? You ultimately need to decide, sometime sooner than later, how much money do I have to actually make these things happen? And breaking down the budget is in a lot of ways not very creative, but it enables the creativity, right? You can have the most brilliant ideas in the world, but if you don't have the tools and sometimes the funds to actualize those things, it does not matter. So that's why I personally get rather excited when I start to break down the budget, because it's a recognition that I can now, I'm moving towards actually realizing these dreams that I've had.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of things that you could say in answer to this specific question, depending on the size of your production, but where do you even start when it comes to breaking down a budget? What are some of the first questions that you ask, maybe of the director or the writer? What are some of the first kind of categories you start throwing onto a spreadsheet? Kind of just talk about that just a little bit.
So, I mean, I think with a budget, you're always trying to figure out how much you can do for how little money. So the starting point is really to think about, like, what is the minimum that we need, the bare minimum that we need, and then dreaming, as big as we want to, like, what would we do if we had all the money in the world?
Sure.
And that gives you these nice poles to then work within of knowing, like, this is we'll never have this amount of money, but if we did, here's what we'd be able to do with it.
Right.
And then if we had no money at all, here's what we'd be able to pull off. And then you start working within that to figure out the creative choices of, okay, like, we're not going to make sacrifices in these areas. Our cast is going to be really, really important. Like on this film in particular, like we want to make sure that we get the best actors that we can find. And so that may mean, going and casting a wider net than we usually would to bring the right people to the location. And that may involve travel, it may involve lodging and things like that wouldn't otherwise be an expense on a different kind of film. So each film, I mean, I think with budgeting, it's always a matter of, like, there's no stock budget. You can't pull a budget off the shelf and say, this is your budget for the film. It has to be, the budget ultimately has to match the creative choices that you're making and the creative priorities that you have, and you're making decisions based on what this film needs in order to flourish, and that's going to be different for each film.
And so one of the first things that I did as the director, and Josh did as the producer as well, is actually go through the script, because ultimately, if you're trying to ultimately figure out the box within which you're going to be actually creating this thing, you need to figure out what's in that box, specifically, very specifically what's in that box. So it's taking the time to go through and break down your screenplay. And you'll probably notice a number of different colored marks on here, each of them representing something different, from props to production design to SFX to VFX, etc., etc. And that's just me taking the time to identify very specifically, I need this prop. I need this piece of set dressing. I need this specific piece of wardrobe. I need this specific special effect. I need this specific sound effect. Because ultimately, you can't start to get specific dollar amounts until you actually know what it is you're needing to pay for. So, I'll definitely throw up some of the actual images of just some of the spreadsheets that we put together, things that we actually thought through. How much for this? How much for that? And then ultimately, too, some of the first questions that you asked me as the director just pertained to how many days. Yeah. How many days do you think you're ultimately going to be wanting to shoot?
Because how quickly you move on set has a huge impact on the budget. And especially, the longer your film is, this is a short, but even with a short film, like, you could do everything on these pages in a day and be really, really rushed, or you could spend a whole week doing it. And a lot of that then has to do with, your shooting approach, like how you're going to cover the scenes, how many times are you going to move the camera and things like that. And so you can make decisions to reduce the budget by adjusting creative choices, like, let's film this whole scene from just these two angles. That's going to shorten the shoot and give you more flexibility in other areas.
Sure.
But if the priority is, we need lots of coverage for this scene, then maybe we need to sacrifice in production design, or we need to sacrifice in post-production or someplace else in order to make that make that work. So it's figuring out those priorities again.
Yeah, and connected to that, I mean, it's obviously very important for the director to have some sort of idea of those answers, of those specific, you know, answers to those questions of how many different shots you're going to need, and then how long are those different shots going to take to shoot? Are they complicated shots? Are they really fast, you know, push-ins on the dolly? Are they just all handheld? And all those kind of things will ultimately be the things that answer these questions. So walking into a meeting like this, be as prepared as you can in those is very helpful. And again, like I've already mentioned, this is something that happens early in the process, so maybe you won't have specific ideas, but maybe, like in my instance, I've shot other films, I've shot other projects before.
You have experience to lean back on.
Exactly. So if I don't have a specific answer to, I actually don't know the exact number of setups that I have yet, at least I can actually look at the page count. I can remember back to, okay, I've shot this many pages before when it was a one-room conversation like this in one day. Does this seem doable? Did I like the results that I got previously?
Right.
Or did I want more time?
You had more time, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of, I mean, once you develop collaborative, once you have a collaborative process, you know, now we both know kind of how you work on set or what kinds of things that are your priorities. So I'm able to, even before we start chatting about this, start to figure out, like, I bet this is what Chris is going to need for this, and figure out a lot of these things even before that conversation begins, because we have that track record, because we know where that's going.
And then one last thing that I'll kind of just mention ultimately is one of the things that Josh and I did, he's kind of already mentioned this, is we've had kind of different versions of this budget put together, and ultimately recognizing that there may be need for contingency or push and pull in one or another area. So looking through and really asking, okay, so this, you know, potentially right now we can spend $0 on this specific thing. But there may come some sort of instance where we're like, you know what, we weren't able to get that lens for free, we weren't able to get that light for free, we had to actually go out and purchase that for whatever reason, or we thought that we could actually pay this actor this much, but it's actually looking like they're more interested in this much, and being able to actually kind of have already contingencies in place of, okay, what are we going to do when this thing is requiring more money than we initially budgeted, and doing that up front, always planning for contingencies is so important.
Well, because at the end of the day, like, as an independent filmmaker, we're always asking for favors. Like, that's pretty much what we're doing, whether it's kickstarting a project, we're asking for favors from a wide group of people who care about us and support us and that sort of thing. And anything we don't raise through something like that, then it just means that now it's favors we're asking for the people that we work with, favors for locations, for equipment and things like that. But regardless, it just comes down to that notion of, like, we need help in order to make this happen, and so we reach out to everyone who knows us and everyone who cares about us, and together, you know, we can make that happen. Yeah,
and I think the last thing I'll add ultimately is, just like Josh mentioned, you're ultimately reaching out, when you're doing a Kickstarter campaign anyways, reaching out to the community, reaching out to people around you. And one of the other really important reasons to do a budget like this, to take the time to break this down, is even if you're a creative person and you've taken months and months and months to put together the screenplay, and you've thought so intentionally about all the camera angles and the decisions that your actors will make, applying that same sort of energy and focus and intention to something like a budget is also important, because ultimately you're asking people for money, and it's a huge way to show just simply respect to them, the fact that they're choosing to invest in it, but it's also an excellent way to demonstrate to them how serious you are about this project. Again, at the end of the day, when it comes to budgeting and actually getting the actual money for your project, at a certain point it ceases to matter how creative you are. If you can't communicate that creativity in ways that other people can grasp onto, it's not going to matter a whole lot. And one of the ways that you can communicate your seriousness, your intentionality, your professionalism, your dependability, your reliability to deliver the product that you're asking or you're telling that you're going to deliver, is to take the time to break all these things down. So definitely put together a budget.
To all of you who are considering supporting us or who have supported us, thank you. We appreciate it. We could not do what we are trying to do without your support, and so sincerely we are grateful for your time, your financial support, and your interest in the project.
Absolutely. Thank you much.